I'm Mr. Baker. I'm a sponsor of the Pilot's Bill of Rights, too, and I do believe that the third-class medical reform will help reverse this trend of a declining general aviation pilot population while also maintain the appropriate level of safety for pilots who are flying for both private and recreational purposes. Your testimony mentions that medical reform has the potential to improve safety by keeping pilots in the airplanes they're most familiar with. Could you expand on that a little further?
Yes, the FAA about a dozen years ago started down this path with testing what we call light sport aircraft. Aircraft that are designed to be flown at under 1,350 pounds, 1,326 I think is the exact number. And in many cases, some old airplanes like the J3 Cub of the 1930s qualifies as a light sport aircraft. And then it evolved into a whole number of, call it, aircraft companies that were built with that purpose in mind, just to be under 1,300 pounds. In many cases, those airplanes are fine and they do well, but in bigger wind, and you get wind in Montana, I know, it's a little harder to control those aircraft. So we're forcing a pilot population with the #1 most popular airplane, 172. If a person chooses not to go down the medical path and get it done, they move downstream into a light sport aircraft and an aircraft they're not as familiar with, potentially, and not as capable of an airplane to fly in conditions.
That helps. Do you think this will help prevent the decline of the pilot population, which I believe is averaging about 6,000 pilots per year?
I do. You know, there's over 350,000 pilots under age 75 that are on the sidelines today. And there are a number of reasons. Could be economic, could be family, could be all kinds of them. But we believe a significant percentage of them would stay in the game and play in the game longer if they weren't burdened with this outdated regulatory issue.
Thanks, Mr. Baker. Ms. Gilligan, I want to shift gears now and go out to eastern Montana. We had Administrator Huerta here recently, and we were discussing the ongoing safety concerns from our general aviation pilots relating to the expansion of the Powder River Training Complex in eastern Montana. Recall that's the MOA there that's be part of Ellsworth. As the administrator in charge of safety of the FAA, I'd like to discuss the safety of the airspace surrounding the Baker Airport in Montana. I think when this was originally, the idea was launched years ago. It was a pretty sleepy little part of southeast Montana. Well, it's been waking up with the energy boom. The Keystone Pipeline routes right through the middle of it. The Baker on-ramp, which will be 100,000 barrels a day of oil, is right there near the Baker Airport. The FAA said they would take this, it's called an adaptive management approach to the implementation of this airspace. Could you describe what adaptive management means? Maybe that's something that's described with the FAA. What does adaptive management look like?
Well, sir, I'm not fully familiar with all of the details of this particular project, and we certainly can provide that to you and your staff to make sure that you have a full understanding of it. But what we are looking at is how we can best manage the airspace to accommodate both growth and assure the appropriate levels of safety at the same time. Growth is a risk factor, and so we need to understand how the airspace, how air traffic, whatever, can manage that growth to assure an appropriate level of safety. And the Air Traffic Organization does its safety risk analysis to be sure that that's being properly handled.
Yeah, that Baker Airport has over 7,000 annual operations, and I think that's the concern is where it's all headed here with the growth. Mm-hmm. And would radar coverage, would real-time communication between air traffic control, military and civilian aircraft, would that help reduce some of the risk as you think about this adaptive management approach?
It may well, sir. That's what the safety risk analysis would have to address. I believe a safety risk analysis either has been completed or is underway for that particular project. And through that, we'll identify if risks are being, or hazards are being introduced, and what the mitigations would be required to address it.
And then along the lines here, your testimony highlights the FAA's proactive nature in identifying and addressing risks to prevent accidents. Mm-hmm. And as part of the flying public, I thank you for that. And specifically, the successful commercial aviation safety team, the CAST model, which uses data to develop an understanding of the best actions or interventions to prevent accidents. Do you know, and this may be getting the weeds here with the Powder River MOA, but do you know if the CAST model has been used in active military operation areas, MOAs?
Well, the Department of Defense is a member of the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, but again, sir, we tend at that group to look at systemic broader issues that perhaps individual members of the team can't really address on their own.
Would they
So that
tend to-
particular kind of issue is not something that the commercial aviation safety team has taken on.
They're not necessarily taking that methodology and using that with MOAs that you know of?
I'm not aware that they are.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you,
Senator,
Mr.
may I
Senator.
quickly add, I used to fly F-4 Phantoms out of the Nellis Air Force Base Range Complex, and while it was often restricted areas as well as MOAs, I think the real-time traffic that was provided, the real-time use statistics of the airspace often made it available to civilians. I think the Nellis Air Force Base Range Complex would be a model that you might want to consider taking a look at.
Thank you for that. By the way, I texted my son and said I was in a hearing with you, and he texted me back and said, "A true American hero."
Thank you.
That's saying something from a son I'm very proud of. Thank you, Captain.
Senator